Hi, it's Alex. Welcome back to my channel. I am so thrilled that this week I hit 2,000 subscribers here on YouTube. Each and every person that subscribes means an awful lot to me. I've had lots of new subscribers recently. I'm absolutely thrilled. So everybody is welcome. And quite often when people hit a bit of a milestone, they'll do a giveaway or something like that, and I decided to do something completely different. I have decided to create a tutorial to make a face mask or a face covering that is not designed for people that know how to sew. A few weeks ago I made some face masks using a free pattern which had been issued by Dhurata Davies, and I got an awful lot of people contacting me a bit disappointed that that video wasn't a tutorial. And I've also got lots of friends who don't really know how to sew who've asked me if I can show them how to do it. Now obviously I can't do that in person at the moment, so I thought this would be a good way to do it. This is a little bit different from my normal kind of thing because I wanted this tutorial to absolutely focus on people who have very little sewing experience, for complete beginners. So if you're somebody that knows how to sew, you're going to find this pretty basic. But if you're somebody who's got a sewing machine going dusty in a cupboard somewhere and you're a bit intimidated by it, you can do this, you really can. And whilst there are easier face mask patterns out there, I chose this one because it's really good. It's shaped to your face and it comes in a number of different sizes, so you can make sure it fits you really well. And honestly, if you just take it step by step, we'll have you addicted to sewing before you know it, and you can have a bunch of face masks. So there will be a link in the description box below which will take you straight through to that blog post where you can download the pattern. And for the purposes of this video, we are just doing the straightforward pattern with 3 layers of fabric, which is mentioned in Dhurata's pattern. There is also an update whereby you can include some wire to put across the bridge of your nose, which means that you can shape it more to the shape of your face, which if you are somebody that wears glasses, that can really help because people are finding their glasses are getting fogged up. And I have also done a second video which is for the more recent update, whereby you can include a filter pocket. So that will be on the second video. But if you want to do the version with a filter pocket, you kind of need to watch this one first. And that's an add-on, I guess. So Dhurata is a one-woman sewing pattern company, and she's put this mask pattern out there for free for people to make for their friends and family, which is obviously incredibly kind of her. So if you do want to give her a bit of a thank you, you could go find her over on Instagram and just say thank you. You could go check out her website and look at some of her other patterns. If you are an experienced sewer, there are some really, really good patterns over there that you might want to buy. And if we get you hooked on sewing and you're a complete beginner, you might want to go and check some of those patterns out because there are definitely some that are suitable for beginners. The other alternative is that she has got a link on her website to buy her a coffee, which is just a small donation to say thank you. And again, that will be in the description box below. But if you're not able to do any of that, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. Carry on. If you are a beginner, you may want to watch the video and go back to certain points along the way. So I will put detailed timestamps in the description box below so that you can jog on to the relevant parts. Before we get into the details, I'm afraid I'm going to have to do a bit of a disclaimer, and that is just to say that I am not in any way qualified to give you advice. I'm not saying that this is a medical grade mask. It is entirely your responsibility to decide if this is something you want to make for your friends and family. And Dhurata has also put something very similar on her blog post. It's up to you to decide what to do. By the same token, the pattern hasn't in any way been tested for small children. So again, use your common sense, make that decision yourselves. And in a similar token, she has also made it very clear that this is a pattern she's put out there for free, and it's not to be made and sold for profit. It's for people to make for their friends and family. She has turned down requests to issue a license for people to put it out there to make money out of, so that's very clear, friends and family only. So choosing fabric can be the fun bit. There are lots of masks out there that are really good. You can have a lot of fun with the fabric, but what you're looking for is woven cotton or polycotton fabric. Like a lot of people who sew, I've recently been making scrubs for the NHS, and we were asked to make it with fabric that could be washed at 60 degrees. And I think that's a really good idea to do the same thing with these, so that they can be thrown in a hot wash after they've been worn every time. So you need something woven, and you need a cotton or a polyester cotton mix. This is left over from me making scrubs. As you can see, it's got no stretch in it at all, and something like that is perfectly suitable. If you're not somebody that has fabric in your house and you don't want to buy some, then bedding is a really good alternative. You can certainly recycle anything that you might have. If you do want to buy something, then a lot of the fabric shops are still working online and sending fabric out, so there's a lot of options out there. For the purposes of demonstrating this, so that it's really clear, I'm going to use different coloured fabric for my inner layer than my outer layer, just so that you can be clear on what I'm doing. But the way it works is that you have a public outer layer that you're going to see, people are going to see. So I'm using this black for my outer layer, and then I'm going to use this blue for the inner layer, for the lining, and then sandwiched in between the two is a cotton jersey fabric, which is the sort of thing that you make t-shirts from. So I'm just using this because I happen to have it. So yeah, that's got stretch to it. But if you don't have fabric, you might have an old t-shirt that you can use, so that will work really well. You do need to wash all of your fabric before you start sewing, and that's partly because you need to check it is washable at 60, and partly because it might shrink, and there is nothing worse than going to the trouble of sewing something only to find that it shrinks and doesn't fit after. Don't ask how I know. If you don't have access to any stretch jersey material, you don't have any old t-shirts around the house, you could opt to make the version that has a pocket inside for a filter, because with that version it's just 3 layers of woven fabric, so you could opt to do that. Again, disclaimer again, we're not advising anything in any way about filters or anything that you might put in that pocket, but people wanted that option, so that's on the other video. The other thing you need to consider is how you're going to tie your mask on. The obvious option is elastic, and I'm lucky enough to have some, and I say lucky enough because it's selling out everywhere because lots of people are making masks. So if you can't get hold of any, or you don't have any supplies, there are other options. You can make ties out of bias binding, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And you can make strips from jersey fabric, which is really easy and very successful if you've got jersey fabric. You can also make fabric strips using your fabric. There are lots of tutorials on YouTube for how to do that. It is a little bit more complicated if you're a complete beginner, but I'll put some links in the description box below if you want to look into that. But the rest of it I will cover. Now obviously the other thing you need is a sewing machine and some thread, and sewing machines can vary wildly, so I'm not going to demonstrate how to thread up your machine or how to wind the bobbin, because yeah, we'd be here till Christmas. But if you don't know, grab your manual or search on YouTube. There'll almost definitely be somebody showing you how to do it. And you want to choose a thread that matches as near as possible your outer fabric. If you end up making quite a lot of these and you don't want to buy lots of different colour thread, then buying a mid-grey is quite a good option, because it tends to it's the one that blends the most with a number of different colours. In terms of equipment, most of the things you're going to need, you'll hopefully have knocking around at home anyway. So you will need some pins, you're going to need a tape measure or a ruler, you're going to need some scissors, you are going to need a safety pin, and I'm trying to think what else. You're going to need some tape. If you're a beginner, if you've got some masking tape, sellotape's no good because it's clear, but something with a colour, washi tape, masking tape, gaffer tape, anything like that, you're going to need some of that as well. The only other thing you might need, if you're going to go for the option with a wire bridge across the nose, is some kind of wire. Now I just went and looked in the garden shed and I found this wire, no idea what it's for. So you might need to experiment and see what you've got. I have read that a really good option is pipe cleaners, and I can see that that would work really well. This wasn't perfect. I had to bend the ends over and kind of squish them down, stop them being sharp and potentially kind of poking you. So you need to have a think about that, but maybe just have a bit of an experiment and see what you've got at home. So you're now ready to download the pattern. Just click in the link in the description box below. That will take you straight through to Dhurata's blog post. You could go check out her other patterns. And you need to make sure when you look at the printer settings that the scale is set to 100%. Print it out and then you're going to get 2 pages. You're actually getting exactly the same pattern twice. The only difference between the 2 pages is that one has a scale box that's in centimetres and one is in inches. But when you print it out, you need to measure that box. Just take one of them, and if it's the 1 centimetre box, you need to make sure that it does measure 1 centimetre. If it doesn't, you might need to have a little play around with your printer settings until you get one that prints out exactly to the right scale. If that box isn't correct, then the pattern isn't correct. So it could end up being too big or too small. So that's really important. You don't need to worry about printing it out in colour if you want to save your precious colour ink. So go ahead, print it out. Then you need to determine which size you're going to cut, and all you have to do is measure from the tip of your nose to the tip of your chin. My measurement was 9 centimetres, and you have a look at the pattern details and it said that a size medium is 8.5 centimetres and a large is 9.5 centimetres. So I was a 9, I opted for a medium, and that's worked really well, and it's actually been the one that's fitted most of the adults here at home. So cut it out, and if I were you, I would cut both out. So when you cut your pattern piece out, it's going to look like this. And this is the pattern piece you're going to use for the outer part of your mask. Now the inner part of your mask takes exactly the same pattern, but there's a line of dots here, and where that dotted line is, you fold back. So I figure, seeing as you've printed out 2 anyway, you might as well cut 2 out and cut that extra bit off. So I'm going to head over to the cutting table now because we're ready to cut out our fabric. But before we do, let me just say, if you've never really sewn anything before, or nothing more than a straight line or even a wonky line, you really can do this. Just take it step by step. It's entirely achievable, and we could have you sewing all sorts before you know it. So yeah, keep the faith. So here we have our face mask pattern all cut out to, as I said, this is to a medium, and you can just use one piece for the entire thing, remembering that when it comes to cutting your 2 lining pieces, you need to fold along this dotted line here that says fold for lining. So you literally just fold it like that. But for the purposes of doing this, I have printed out a second version and cut that off. So that smaller one is for my lining and the larger one is for my outer piece. So what I need to do is I need to take my fabric for my outer piece and fold it with the right side of the fabric touching, so something like that. This is the point at which, if I've got a stripe or a print that's in any way directional, I need to decide which way round I want it to go across the face. So in this case, I want my print to fall this way, so my face would be here, so that the rectangles are going down, and that means that I'm going to fold it across like this. Now, because I've got the rectangles, I can use those to line it up and make sure that it's nice and straight. And I'm going to take my larger pattern piece, so the one with the extra bit here, and line this edge here, the one that has the markings here that say cut on fold, and line that up with the fold here, making sure, you see, look, that's not quite fitting there, so I can either move it up here or refold the fabric, but for the purposes of this I'll just move it here. And then I'm just going to pin it and then cut it out, making sure not to cut any of the paper off because you'll alter the size. And you can cut it out just with regular scissors, or if you are somebody who sews, you might have a rotary cutter like I have, but you just literally just cut that out and put it to one side. So you do the same thing for the two lining pieces. If you've got a plain fabric like I've got here, you want to make sure that you don't fold it sort of any old fashion. If you fold it, even though this is a woven fabric with no stretch to it, if you fold it across, this is called the bias, and that will have natural stretch, and you don't want that. That will go all a bit skew whiff. So you do want to be a little bit careful. You don't have to worry too much, but just fold it. That's the edge of my fabric. Just fold it neatly so that it's pretty straight. And again, line up this edge with the cut on fold marking, with the fold. Make sure, if like me you're using offcuts, make sure that there's fabric on both sides, pin all the way around and cut it out. You do the same with your interlining fabric. This is a little bit different because it's jersey and it does stretch, and it will always want to do what this fabric here is doing, which is it will want to roll up at the edges. So, you know, that is just the nature of the beast. You still fold it, and you want to make sure that you are treating it almost as if it is a woven fabric and you're not stretching it out in any way. Just keep it nice and flat. And the same thing, you line up this edge that says cut on fold with your fold. So you line it up there, pin it and cut it out. So here we have all our pieces, the outer piece, the two lining pieces, and we're ready to go. So first thing we're going to do while they're in this state is finger press. You can do this with an iron, but you know, why make life harder for yourself? So you just take the edge of your fingernail and score it right in the middle. So no good doing it like that. They need to be properly lined up, and so you get an exact replica of that middle line. Don't know how much the camera's going to pick that up. And you're going to do that with all three pieces. Be a little bit more careful with the jersey because what you don't really want to do is push it too far. So you've got all three fabrics that you've finger pressed. You're going to twizzle them round so that you can see this longer angle here, like this. And this is your chin dart. The shorter one up here is your nose dart, but we're looking at the chin dart for now. And you're going to take some pins and you are going to pin it. And then in a minute you're going to sew your first seam. So we're going to take them to the machine and go from there. So we're about to do our first seam, and this pattern has been drafted with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, which means that it's 1 centimetre from the edge of the fabric here to where the needle comes down and creates the stitches. And my machine, like an awful lot of machines, has a marking on here for these are all my centimetres and these are all imperial measurements at the back. Yours might not have exactly the same thing. It might not even have any at all. So if you're a complete beginner, what is really handy to do is to grab the tape that I referred to earlier to mark where 1 centimetre sits on your machine. If you're a beginner, it might be very useful to keep some tape on there, even if you do have the markings. And now what you're going to do, if you really want to, you can mark the 1 centimetre seam on this fabric here. Just do it with a pen and a ruler, but I promise you it's not that hard, and you really don't need to do that if you don't have to. But if you feel happier to do that, then fine. So now you need to put your fabric under your foot and a little bit further in so that you're not literally just on the edge, and line up the edge of the fabric with the edge of your tape. First thing you're going to do is put your sewing machine foot down. You're going to put your needle down and you're going to remove that pin. I have a horrible habit of sewing over pins. It's not the end of the world, but it can break a needle and it's really not very good for your sewing machine, so I don't recommend it. So you do need to make sure you know how to make your sewing machine go backwards. There may be a specific button for it, but I will take a picture of the button on my machine so you can see the sort of thing it ordinarily looks like. So first of all, we're going forwards. So you take a couple of stitches forwards, remembering that what we're doing is we're not looking at the needle, we're looking at this edge here. So your eye needs to be here all the time, matching this edge of the fabric with this tape. So take a couple of stitches forward and then make sure that your needle is down into the fabric. My machine does that automatically, yours may not. And then you press your reverse button and you go back, keeping that edge lined up with the tape until you get to the edge. Keep your needle in, undo the reverse, and you're going to come back forward. So again, lining up with the edge of that tape all the way. Remove the pin until you get to the edge at the front. And when you get to that edge, you're going to press your reverse button again. Take, 3 or 4 stitches back. Then needle up, foot up, remove the fabric, give it a snip, and you've just created your first seam. It is very important to make sure that you do that back stitching at either end of this seam, because if not, the seam can unravel and it won't be strong, and then that's completely pointless. So you might want to tidy up those threads, but I'll do that in a sec, because you're now going to do exactly the same thing on your outer fabric. Remember, this is my lining. So on your outer fabric and also on your jersey interlining. So let's do the jersey interlining next. It's exactly the same thing. You always want your threads at the back, by the way. So exactly the same thing. I'm lining up with the edge here, a little way in. Now, if you are somebody that's done any sewing, or you've maybe been to some lessons or something, you may know that normally when we sew with a stretch fabric, we sew with a zigzag stitch so that the fabric stitches don't snap when the fabric stretches. But for this, you don't need to do that, because this fabric isn't going to stretch. So it's just a regular straight stitch. So same deal, foot down, needle down, a couple of stitches forwards, into reverse, so you get to the edge, undo reverse and come forward again, lining up with the edge of the fabric and the edge of your tape till you get to the front edge. Hit reverse. Doesn't really matter if that's chewing up a little bit there, it's not the end of the world. And then needle out, foot up, and give it a snip. So if you do the same thing with your outer piece, and then we'll come back to the next stage. So you just need to give these seams a bit of a tidy up. So you're going to cut away any excess on the threads here, and on this edge, so the straight edge, you're just going to cut diagonally across up to but not through the stitching, and turn it over on this edge, which is the folded edge. You're going to get your scissors through that fold and cut down but not through the stitching, like that. And you're going to do that on all three. So you should have 3 pieces that look like this. These 2 are the smaller ones, and then this slightly larger one for the outer. So what you're going to do is you're going to open this up like a book, and this bottom edge is going to want to flip up, which you let it do, and you want the bottom of your stitching to be at the end. You're going to open up the seam allowance just with your fingers and give that a finger press with the edge of your nail, and then you want to make sure that the top edge here lines up with the crease that you pressed in. So you've basically got a straight line that runs from the bottom here through your stitching and up to the middle there. And once you've got that, get a pin and pin it right into where that seam line is. So it looks like that. Okay, do exactly the same thing with the other 2. So open it up like a book, let it flip up, open up the seam allowance, come on, give it a finger press, make sure it sort of wants to line up, actually, that it lines up with that crease. Pop a pin in. Oh, I've got very blunt pins. The jersey one may be a little more fiddly just because of the nature of the fabric, but it just tends to want to roll a little bit at the edges, but it's entirely achievable. So same deal, open up the seam allowance, finger press, make sure it's lined up with the crease, and in goes the pin. This, by the way, is probably the most complicated section. It only gets easier from once we've got past this stage. So the next thing you need to do is take a look at Dhurata's instructions for the chin dart. Now, I'm making a medium, and the chin dart measurement for the medium is 3.5 centimetres, which is here on my tape measure where my thumb is. So I'm going to line that 3.5 centimetre up with this bottom edge, and I want the top edge, or 0, to line up with the top of my tape measure, and I want the middle to be exactly halfway through, which is 1.75, so that's down a bit more like there, just a bit of a wiggle around, that's about right. And then I'm going to mark it with some chalk. We're going to be sewing this line where we've just marked in chalk. This chalk line is pretty fat, so I need to bear in mind that I'm starting on this inner side of the chalk marking, not all the way over here. And like we did before, we're going to start sewing a little bit further in, not right at the edge, because that's when the edge of your fabric will get all mangled up into the sewing machine and it'll be a disaster and you'll not want to carry on sewing again. So Mark up your fabric pieces like this, either with chalk, or you can just use biro or pen. Once they're all marked up, we'll take them back to the sewing machine and carry on. So this time we're not lining up with the tape, but we're going to leave the tape there because we're going to need it again. So what we're doing is, this time the needle needs to line up with our marking. So as I said, we're not going to go right from the edge, a little bit in. I'm going to put the foot down first, and I can probably take the pin out. And what I'm looking for is the line that I've drawn in immediately under my needle here, and this gap in my sewing machine foot. Your foot might be a bit different, but basically, is that going to line up? So the best thing to do is manually put your needle into the fabric. Does it hit the line? If not, you might have to shift it around a little bit, but once it does, I'm going to do the same thing again. A couple of stitches forward, end with your needle down, press reverse, go back to the edge, stop at the edge, take the reverse off and come forwards. And the whole time, this time your eye is on the needle hitting where you drew that line in. Once you get to the edge, needle down, reverse for 3 stitches, needle up, foot up, give it a snip. So we should have all three pieces should look like this. You've got stitching across here and the flat seam allowance there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the nose dart, which is easier than the chin dart. So we're going to fold this back to how it was previously. Make sure that these edges at the top here and here are matching beautifully. Put a pin in, do the same for all 3, and then we're going to take it to the machine and we're going to sew along here. So you're going to take the lining piece, put it under the machine, so you've got your folded edge here at an angle, the straight edges are down here. You'll line that edge up with the tape, start a little bit further in, foot down, needle down, same deal. A couple of stitches forward, and then back tack to the edge, forward again, and can you see here, because of the angle of the fabric piece here, you're not able to line up the edge of the tape with the edge of the fabric up here, or where that seam marking is on the plate here. And that's why the tape method works well, because you can still see, you can still keep your eye on the fabric here as it moves away. And you're going to cut these in exactly the same way as we did with the chin dart. So get rid of the tails, do a bit of a snip here, up to but not into the stitches, and then through the fold here, up to but not into the stitches. Turn that the wrong side out. We're going to do the same thing again, where we just finger press this open. All this finger pressing can be done with an iron and pressed, you know, the normal way, and that will give you a nice clean finish. But if you can do it quickly yourself and easily and just as effectively, why not? It's now starting to look more like a mask. So we're going to take the lining, the interlining, and the outer is going to be put to one side. And we want the two wrong sides to match each other. So this is the wrong side on the chin dart, and I'm going to match these two seams up with each other. So here they are. I'm literally just lining them up so that they meet equally at the top and that the seam lines here match up. So I'm going to put my pin in one side and wiggle it so that it comes out the seam line on the other side. There we are, hopefully that's focused. Put it back in the seam on that side and hopefully it will come out on the seam line, and that way we know that that is absolutely matched. Do the same thing, turn it over, make sure they're open. Same thing with the nose dart, so match them up. Okay, so that's the nose, that's the chin. So now what you're going to do is you're going to match up these edges here. What you don't want to do, and this is important, it's very easily done when you've got a stretch fabric, is you don't want to stretch this fabric to fit it. Okay, you need to let it behave as if it was a woven fabric and that it didn't have the ability to stretch, and then you'll be fine. So just stick a couple of pins in along the edge. And that's what you're going to do along the top edge and the bottom edge. So that's the two long edges, not the sides. So there we go. That's the chin. No, it's not, it's the nose. Put as many pins in as you feel comfortable. I'm happy with this number of pins. In fact, to be honest, I'd probably use even less, but you do what makes you feel most comfortable. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to sew those together. So we're going to sew that line there, and then the same thing on the other side. This time doing something a tiny bit different in that we actually want to make this seam just short of this seam allowance, so a little bit narrower. Instead of being 1 centimetre, we want it to be 0.8, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to still line it up with the tape, put my sewing machine foot down, and then I'm going to use the sewing machine to move the needles slightly to the right. Now, if your sewing machine doesn't allow you to do that, that's fine, or you're not sure how to do it, that's fine. What you can do is you can line up your edge of your fabric with the edge of the foot here. As long as that is less than 1 centimetre, it will work beautifully. So I will do that just for the purposes of demonstration. So same old story. Forward a couple, back to the edge, and off we go. Now this time you might want to take it a bit slowly because sorry, ignore that. Because it's just my machine telling me my bobbin thread's got low. So you might want to do a couple of stitches, make sure the needle's down before you do anything, swing your fabric round so that it's lining up with this edge, a couple more stitches, swing it, a couple more stitches, swing it. Now my machine automatically, when I stop, slightly raises my foot. Yours may not do that, in which case you'll do something like this. once you get the hang of it, and then we're going to do exactly the same thing along the top edge. So if you need to stop and start, that's absolutely fine, nothing wrong with that. Slow and steady wins the race. Once you've done a few of these, even if you've not really done much sewing before, you will soon get the hang of it. So this is the point at which, if you are going to put some wire in, you're going to do it at this point. If you're not going to do that, then just whiz on to the next bit. So you need to have a little bit of a play yourself with sizes, but I've cut this to 8 centimetres, so it will be 4 centimetres either side of the nose dart seam. So make sure you're on your nose dart and not a chin one that looks like that. Okay, so you're going to measure out 4 centimetres either side of that seam and just put a little mark. As I say, it could just be pen or pencil, chalk, whatever you've got, it doesn't really matter. And do that both sides. So what we're going to be doing is sewing a channel across here, and it's going to run from where this pink mark starts here to where this one ends here, and it's going to be a bit further out, it's going to be here. Now we need something to line up against, and if I line up against the edge here, that's not going to give me enough space to create a channel. And if I line up the edge of my tape, it's going to be too much space. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift the tape and move it along. So I've lined it up with 2 centimetres. Line it up so I start where the pink is. Needle down, a couple of stitches forward, same number of stitches back, and then same old. This time, same thing, just keeping an eye on this edge. It's curving away here, so I might lift my presser foot up, jiggle this around so it's back in line with it. Put down, carry on. Until I get to where that pink mark is. And this time, I'm going to keep the needle down, press a foot up, and I'm going to turn my fabric round. So that it's straight on. Put the foot down. Sew up to meet that original line of stitching, a couple of stitches back tacking, needle up, foot up. Might need to give it a bit of a wiggle when you hit the seams. But yeah, so I've trimmed the tails just to make it a bit neater, but look, there we are. We've got a channel with an open end at one end and closed at the other, and the wire, you might just be able to see where the wire is. So I'm going to just jiggle that wire away from this edge here and line this up with my foot with my needle. So what I want to do is I want that needle to hit this exact stitching. So I might need a bit of fiddling around. There we go. It might take a little bit of jiggling, it's fine, doesn't have to look neat and beautiful. So usual story, bit of a back tack, and then when you sort of get to where you were last time, maybe a stitch or two past, lift up your presser foot, turn it round, put it back down, stitch forwards, close off your casing. So the casing is now done. can be bent and shaped over the nose to fit. So now we've taken the outer section and we're going to line it up with the interlining and lining section that's now one piece, and stitch it along the long edges, along this long edge underneath the chin dart and this top edge on top of the nose dart. So what you need to do is you need to line up the right side of the nose dart to the right side of the nose dart on the lining fabric. Same thing as we did before, you're just lining them up and putting a pin in. You do need to bear in mind you may have a wire in there or a bit of pipe cleaner to navigate. Same thing here, and then you're going to pin all along the edge, lining them up. There you go. So those seam lines are matched. So I'm going to pin this along here, but remember this doesn't go all the way to the edge because this outer piece is bigger. So this is what we've got. Looks like this on the sides, but all neatly lined up at the top and the bottom. And we're just going to do a row of stitching up here. So we're lining it up, usual story, just a little bit further in from the edge. Press a foot down, put the needle down, and can you see that we are just, our stitching is just, should be just to the left of where we stitched the two lining pieces together. So this section here is called the seam allowance, and this should be inside the seam allowance, so you can't see it once we've turned it the right way around. But to be a little bit more careful around here because you've got a wire or a pipe cleaner in there, so you might need to go a little slower and make sure that you kind of jiggle the wire closer in to this side of the channel rather than to here where you're creating the seam. So can you see where we sewed the two lining pieces together? That's this row of stitching here, and where we sewed the seams together is this stitching here. So as long as this stitching is this side, we're fine. If it's that side, it's not so good. So you're going to do exactly the same thing on the other side, and I reckon you're a bit more confident now if you haven't sewn, and you can just get on and do it. But just as a reminder, that's how it looks on the inside, on the lining side. So you've got the two rows here, and on the outside you can just see the one row of stitching. Now what we do, I've just snipped off the tails just to neaten it up. Now what we're going to do is turn it inside out. So the way you want to do that is you want to turn it and take the two outer lining pieces, or the outer and the lining, not the interlining, and literally just bring it up through here. In the sewing community, we call this birthing. There we go, looks like that on the outside, that on the inside. And this is where we can't be doing any more finger pressing. We actually need to get our irons out and give it a press. And what you want to do is you want to press the long edges, but so that, I mean, I'm demonstrating this very clearly because I've got different fabric on the inside than the outside, which is obviously perfectly fine. But when you press it, you want to make sure that the fabric favours the front. So it's like that at the front, which would look like that at the back, and not like that. Okay, probably a good time to trim any little odd bits like that. So give it a press all the way down that edge there on both sides. Okay, so I've pressed all the edges, and then on the inside it looks like this. So this edge, you just continue the line down So I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to fold it over, and I could measure it, but really I'm just folding it over to enclose this edge. So I'm just going to do it by eye. Give it a bit of a blast of steam, and then do the same thing on the other side. Go back to the original side, and I just want to fold this edge here, let's see, this edge here, under about 1/2 centimetre. So, I mean, again, I could measure it, but I don't think you really need to. I wouldn't worry too much about it. So I'm folding it about that much, and I'm going to give it a press. So that's what I've pressed under. So when I fold the whole thing back over, this raw edge and this raw edge, both edges are completely enclosed. So give it another press and put a couple of pins in to secure, and that's where we're going to be sewing next. Do that on both sides. Can you see the red dots on here on my foot? Now your foot may not be the same, so you need to find something that works for your sewing machine and your setup. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on lining up the edge, the outer edge of my fabric here with this dot here, so that if you imagine my needle's there, it means I should be a few millimeters away from that edge, and that's what I'm going to focus on when I'm sewing. So I'm going to be focusing on matching that dot up with that edge. Now, you might find that your foot is different, so you may have to find something else. Sometimes I'll line things up with this edge here. This would be way too big a distance between here, where your needle's going to be, and the edge. Alternatively, you might find it just as easy to line it up with a marking on the right hand side. You just need to fiddle around with your own machine, but basically that's where we're at, and we want to do a row of stitching that just follows the section that's been folded over. So we are done. That's it. You've made your mask. There's the chin, there's the nose, there's the inside with the wire, which you may not have chosen to do. All good. Now, the only thing that it doesn't tell you to do on the pattern that I think is a good idea to do is to do another row of stitching along this edge, because you've enclosed the raw edges of the lining fabric here, and I think if you're going to keep washing it, you're likely to get bits of fraying poking out of the holes there. So just to make sure that everything is nice and secure and it's, you know, going to withstand a nice heavy wash, I'm going to do another row of stitches down that edge using exactly the same method as I did here, finding something to line up against and sewing down. There are special feet for your sewing machine that help you with this, but I'm trying to keep it simple. Okay, so it's all completed. So there we go, that's the right side. Obviously, if that was black, you wouldn't even read that stitching. That's the wrong side, with the channel there, with the wire in to bend over your nose. So next we need to do the elastic or the ties. So we're going to start with the elastic first because that's the easiest. So this piece of elastic is actually a tiny bit too short for what we need, so I'm only using it to demonstrate. In terms of, this is about 60 centimetres, and that's just not quite long enough. I found about 80 to be right for me, but you may have a head that's bigger or smaller, so go by the markings or the dimensions that Dhurata's given on her pattern. So you need to set, this is where your safety pin comes in. So you basically just attach the elastic, so you feed it down one channel, and it's going to go along the bottom and back up the other side. Sometimes it needs a bit of a wiggle on the top edge here if it gets caught in the where the fabrics fold over, but you can do that. Open up the safety bin, and then you just tie these together. Remember, I said this is a bit on the short side, as I found to my cost. And I tried to make one the other day. So that's it with elastic. Being that the mask I've made is black, I'm going to make a version with ties, and I've got this shop bought bias binding, so as you can see it's already pre-folded, and I have just with my iron folded it over and pressed it all the way, and all I'm going to do is run some stitches down the length. I mean, ideally you want them to be close to the edge if you can, but honestly it doesn't really matter. Nobody is going to look at how neat your stitching is on here. If you are stitching something narrow like this, you definitely don't want to start too close to the edge. I would have enough of a tail out the other side that you can hold it with your other hand, and that way you'll manage to keep it relatively straight and you don't have to worry too much about the sewing machine eating it. So to make jersey strips is nice and easy. You need to make sure that you've got the length that you require. So you're probably not going to get it out of a t-shirt, but if you have got jersey fabric, literally all you do is cut strips that are around about 1 centimetre wide. I wouldn't even bother measuring it. I would literally just do it freehand, cut. Okay, so I'll only do a little bit just to demonstrate, but I just, you know, give it a go. It doesn't have to be exact. You can do it with scissors, you don't have to have a rotary cutter. So there's your strip, and all you've got to do is give it a little pull. So once you've pulled them, they curl over and they become kind of like a string. So they're absolutely perfect, cheap as chips, and if you have got jersey fabric around, they're going to be softer over your ears. Really are definitely the easiest way to do it. So I hope you now have a wearable face mask, and if you do, that's brilliant, congratulations. Let me tell you, if you can make a face mask, you're on the way to make anything, and you too could become one of the sewing addicted. If you want to check out the filter version, it kind of works in correlation with this video, but you might want to give that a try. You might want to try the version with the wire or without the wire. And if you want to put anything in the comments below, any tips that you've come across, especially with regard to that wire, there are a few things you can do to speed up, but I was trying to keep it really, really simple and really basic for the time being. If you want to subscribe to my channel, that would be really good. Go check out Dhurata's other patterns. If you are on any social media and you have made masks, I'd really love to see them. I know Dhurata would as well, and please credit her for the use of her pattern. So I'll put a link below for Dhurata on Instagram, and also for me, Alex Judge Sews. I'd really like to see what you make. We can all have an awful lot of fun with fabric choices on this. I certainly intend to make matching masks for everything I make from now on. So yeah, that would be fabulous. I'd really love to see what you make, and thank you very much for watching, and maybe I'll see you again. Thanks a lot. Bye.